Love, love, love my calendar girl. Yeah, sweet calendar girl. I love my calendar girl. Each and every day of the year. January, you start the year off fine. February, you're my little Valentine. March, I'm gonna march you down the aisle. April, you're the Easter bunny when you smile. Yeah, yeah, the hearts in the world. I love my little calendar girl every day. Every day, every day, every day of the year. Hey, maybe if I ask your dad and mom, they'll let me take you to the junior prom. Like a firecracker, I'm aglow. When you're on the beach, you steal the show. Yeah, yeah, the hearts in the world. I love my little calendar girl every day. Every day, every day, every day of the year. Yeah, yeah, the hearts in the world. I love my little calendar girl every day. Every day, every day of the year. September, light the candles at your sweet 16. Romeo and Juliet on Halloween. I'll give thanks that you belong to me. December, you're the present beneath my Christmas tree. Yeah, yeah, the hearts in the world. I love my little calendar girl every day. Every day, every day, every day of the year. I love my calendar girl. Yeah, sweet calendar girl. I love my calendar girl. Yeah, sweet calendar.
Why aging? Well, the question of why we age at the rate we do, or what causes us to age. I mean, what could be more close to home to every person in the aging process, really? I mean, maybe not to teenagers, but after you become a young adult and you're very intimately aware of the aging process, and I think more so as time goes on. Practically nothing is known about it, compared to what we know about almost everything else in biology, how you switch a gene on and off, how you control the cell cycle, how you make a muscle cell. We know lots about all of those things. We know a lot about cancer, for example, a lot about many diseases. But we know just a little more than nothing, but almost nothing about aging. It's like one of the few totally unsolved mysteries left in the world. That is the world of biology.
Evolution is a process in which the genetic information of populations of animals and plants gets shaped. One of the most important forces that shapes this genetic information is selection. In selection, basically, nature keeps what it likes and gets rid of what it doesn't like. So the stuff that it likes is genes that make you big and strong and reproductive and resistant to diseases and able to survive. The stuff that it doesn't like is all of the stuff that makes you weak, infirm, infertile, unable to function. This is an interesting lead-in to the problem of aging, because aging is almost exactly the stuff that you would think selection would stop. Aging involves us losing our fertility, losing our ability to survive, losing our ability to resist disease. Aging is all kinds of bad things, all rolled into one and delivered to us in a nice package toward the end of our lives. Why would evolution ever allow this to occur? And the answer is that evolution allows this to occur because basically selection has taken a holiday by the time you are a middle-aged human.
Une fois qu'un individu s'est reproduit, il a fait son travail vis-à-vis de l'espèce, et il n'y a pas tellement de raisons du point de vue de l'espèce pour le maintenir en vie. Si par exemple on prend des lapins qui sont bouffés statistiquement par des prédateurs, il a une durée de vie d'1 an, il n'y a aucune raison de le maintenir en vie pendant 15 ans. Donc il va se reproduire avant la première année, et ensuite, ma foi, advienne que pourra. Donc il est un peu laissé pour compte de l'évolution.
Because you no longer matter reproductively, you no longer matter to selection, you no longer matter to evolution, and all kinds of bad things can happen to you at later ages. And that's why we age. People often ask me, why do you work with fruit flies? The fact is, you and fruit flies have DNA, you and fruit flies have RNA, you and fruit flies have protein, you and fruit flies have lipid, you and fruit flies have neurons, you and fruit flies have all of these things that are the same. So, we're pretty similar organisms, fundamentally. But also, I know that things like the declining force of natural selection with age affects humans just as much as it affects fruit flies. Normally, fruit flies just reproduce very quickly and then die not too long after that. You start the next generation right away. Bang, 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 bang. Which then goes through exactly the same life cycle. Using alterations in natural selection, our goal was to produce postponed aging. The basic experiment is to take a culture of fruit flies and discard the eggs they produce when they're young and when they're middle-aged. We choose the eggs laid by the older females and use those eggs to start the next generation. What we're basically doing is delaying the bang. The bang comes later. And the result of this, by changing the force of natural selection, is clear. There is apparently genetic variation in the population, kinds of populations that we study, which will respond to the changed natural selection pattern and will say, oh, the rewards are now for reproducing later. Well, we'll change reproduction. We will survive longer and reproduce later. And that's what they do after some generations. And we have produced, by selection, fruit flies that have an adult phase that's about twice as long. So instead of being about 40 days adult life on average, it's about 80 days. That's the beautiful thing about evolution, is its power is shown both in the really good things it does for you and in the fact that when it dumps you, like a former girlfriend, You're nothing. You're garbage. You're history.
Le vieillissement, c'est un phénomène complètement universel. Tout objet qui fonctionne approche, un jour ou l'autre, d'une manière ou d'une autre, de l'arrêt ou de la désintégration, ou de la disparition dans l'environnement. Et les organismes en ça ne font pas exception, ils se comportent de la même manière.
One theory for how we age is that we wear out the way a car wears out. We get damaged, so we get old and die. And that's possible. It's also possible that it's not quite so haphazard. It might be that there's actually a program for aging. A mouse gets old and dies after just 2 years, very, very rapidly. And an old mouse has white hair, moves slowly, and looks old in just the same way that an old dog looks old or an old human looks old. That's 2 years. A canary gets old and dies after about 13 years, much longer. And for a bat, it can be 35 to 50 years. It's a very, very slow rate of aging for a bat. So it must have something to do with the genes of these animals, because that's what makes them different from one another. Well, we work on a tiny worm. It's only about 1 millimeter long. You can hardly see it with your naked eye. And they have short lifespans also. The whole aging process takes place and is completed in just a couple weeks. They get old and they die. That means that if you're interested in studying how an animal ages and why it ages at a certain rate, you can do this very easily in these worms because it all happens so quickly. This is a worm that's old. It's about 24 days old. But very few will live more than, say, 25 days or so. They slow down and then they die. Yeah, she's a goner. She's this worm on her deathbed. 24 days old. She's had a rich, long, satisfying life. Our task is to find the genes inside the worm that cause them to age and die in 2 weeks instead of, say, a year or like 50 years or whatever. So we take our worms, like a zillion worms, and then we treat the worms with X-rays, and it can change the components of the DNA. So you'll have a whole new kind of strain or race of worms that differs from the normal worm because one of its genes is defective. We call those mutants. So treating these worms with X-rays is analogous to taking a gun and just randomly spraying bullets at something like, let's say, a car. This is a good New York analogy, for example. Spray bullets at a car. Now, in some cars, you might, and then you ask, what's wrong with the car? Some cars now have flat tires. So you can say, you need tires to move. Other cars will be able to move just fine, but the windshield wipers won't work. And you'll say, oh yeah, well, that's where the bullet is, in the windshield wiper. This must be, or in some wire inside the car that's used to run the windshield wipers, you see. So you can just see that if you do this to a car, if you think about it, if you just have 1 million cars and 1 million bullets and you shoot them like this, you can come up with kind of a map for each part of a car. Like you could get a map for the whole entire windshield wiper system. You'd have, well, you could hit the windshield wipers, and you could hit basically this wire. You'd have like bullets going all along here that you would have. You see, if you drew all the cars and you put a little dot for where the bullet was, you'd come out with the windshield wiper system. Okay, so anyway, that's one analogy. Now, a better analogy, really, is if you think not of the car, but of the blueprint for the car. There must be, these people that make cars must have directions for how to make the car. It's almost like you're shooting the gun at the directions for how to make the car. And so maybe what you'll do is you'll hit the part of the directions that tells you how to make windshield wipers. Okay, so now the person makes the car following the directions, but the part about the windshield wipers is screwed up, so you get a car with no windshield wipers. And that tells you that this part of the directions has to do with windshield wipers. And that's more analogous, because the DNA that's the instruction for how to build an animal. So what we're doing is we're finding the little bits of the instructions for how that will then allow the animal to eventually to age at a certain rate. Now what we need to do is find the worm in which we have hit a gene for aging. From each little family, we take some worms that are very young, and we allow them to grow up and age. After about 25 days, there won't be any worms alive for normal worms. But the mutant worms, which are the same in every way as the normal worms except for one gene, just one gene is different, they're still moving around, and they're eating, and they don't know that it's time to die. They don't. They're on the tennis court. They're fine. So when you look at the worms, you think, oh my God, these worms should be dead, but they're not. So you see. Now here, what you see is this is a mutant worm. So this worm differs from the normal worm by one gene. This worm is 80 days old. Oops, uh-oh. There he is, look at that! So I just picked the worm up and put him down again, and that has, you now see a frenzy of motion here for this old fellow. Don't you feel a kind of supernatural feeling going through you right now? This worm should have been dead. By 20 days, it's 80 days, and he's still living and moving on after changing one gene. 80 days old, ladies and gentlemen. A marvel of science. Once you're confronted with genes that regulate aging, the question immediately presents itself: could we use this information to extend the lifespan of humans? I could certainly imagine changing a mouse in some way so that it could have the 30-year lifespan of the bat. So when you get to humans, if you ask me, could a human possibly live longer? I would have to say, I think probably so. Of course we wouldn't want to do it if we just extend the time in the nursing home. But if we could prolong the good part of life, would we want to extend the lifespan of humans?
The little French mountain town of Besson is barely a pinpoint on the map, but this birthday celebration makes it a very special place, for it honors Madame Marianne Boniface, 100 years old. One of the guests is 102 today, and what makes the event even more newsworthy is that there are 36 old people hereabouts.
On sait depuis plus d'un siècle que dans certaines familles on vit plus longtemps, dans d'autres familles on vit moins longtemps, on peut avoir des maladies, mais la propension à la longévité est en partie génétiquement déterminée.
Nearing the 100 mark, Monsieur Terminon. Proper diet, hard work, that's the formula.
On se dit au départ, simplement, voilà, il y a des facteurs génétiques qui influencent la longévité. Si on imaginait qu'à l'intérieur de l'espèce humaine, il y a en quelque sorte une sous-espèce, un petit peu mutante, qui vit plus longtemps parce qu'elle vieillit plus lentement, ça change tout. C'est pas la même chose que de dire il y en a certains qui ne vont pas attraper de cancer, qui auront moins d'athérosclérose, etc. Il y a des personnes qui sont exceptionnelles dans la mesure où elles ont survécu très longtemps. Elles sont passées à travers de beaucoup de choses. Elles sont passées à travers de maladies, de difficultés environnementales, de perturbations qui statistiquement arrivent à tout le monde. Et elles ont donc atteint un âge exceptionnel, 100 ans. On a fait un appel au peuple. Donc dès le départ, c'était un projet public qui, dans sa naissance même, a fait appel à la participation de la population. Pour la première fois peut-être dans l'histoire de la génétique, on ne faisait pas appel à des gens malades, mais on faisait appel à des gens tout à fait bien portants, normaux, on ne peut pas dire super normaux, mais donc on avait un message du genre, voilà, vous avez survécu, et donc nous sommes intéressés par vous. Vous voyez ? Souvent, les personnes extrêmement âgées, les centenaires, ont tendance à exagérer leur âge, par fierté en quelque sorte, et donc on a besoin vraiment d'une authentification stricte, et c'est pour ça que nous recherchons les registres d'état civil. Il faut aller dans les archives départementales, surtout si on veut les registres des parents des centenaires, pour faire une étude généalogique, des parents même des grands-parents. On a maintenant dépassé les 800 centenaires et environ 200 fratries nonagénaires. Et on a un matériel donc qui est largement suffisant pour aller chercher toutes les influences génétiques sur la longévité en France. Quand je dis une influence génétique, donc c'est un gène qui existe sous une forme différente chez les centenaires. On a toujours une réponse statistique. Par exemple, on va trouver telle forme se trouve à 10% chez les centenaires, alors qu'elle est seulement à 2% chez les adultes normaux. Ce serait extraordinaire. Donc ça veut dire que vraiment, on a là un facteur très favorable à la survie. Ou au contraire, telle forme qui est répandue à 50%, eh bien on la retrouve qu'à 20% chez les centenaires. Donc les gens qui l'avaient ont été éliminés peu à peu, sont morts. Alors au départ, donc, on a une corrélation, on a une forme, donc disons qu'on a une version du texte génétique. Voilà ce qu'on peut dire. Nous avons trouvé une version du texte génétique qui est plus ou moins représentée chez les centenaires. Très bien. Maintenant, ça nous dit, dans cette région-là, de l'encyclopédie donc, du génome, peut-être dans le chapitre 25, on a trouvé une version donc, qui concerne le 3e paragraphe du chapitre 25, mais en réalité, on ne sait pas où est la cause. Mais on dit probablement la cause est quelque part dans le chapitre 25. Tout le but, c'est d'arriver à trouver quelle est précisément la phrase dans le chapitre 25, le mot, éventuellement la lettre, qui fait une différence. À partir de là, le défi sera de trouver au niveau individuel comment cette forme agit et quel est le mécanisme par lequel elle favorise ou défavorise la survie. On sait aujourd'hui que l'approche marche. C'est déjà ça. Et aujourd'hui, on peut dire qu'on a au moins maintenant 2 ou 3 influences importantes sur la survie. On est tout au début, c'est déjà pas mal, mais on est tout au début, oui.
To every man who lives out his normal lifespan, there comes sooner or later the fateful moment when he realizes that he is no longer young.
Did you hear Sally's father reminiscing at the party the other night? Yes. He must be older than I thought. And I'd always thought of Sally's father as being sort of, well, young. He almost floored me when he said he could remember back to the days when there were no sound movies. That must have been about 20 years ago. Well, I mean, I didn't have any idea he was so ancient.
Nobody wants to get old and decrepit. I think that's what scares us all, is the loss of ability. Your brain doesn't work as well, your body doesn't work as well. It's terrifying. Nobody wants to go through that. So just as nobody wants to experience cancer, nobody wants to experience aging. And I would say at the heart of the major efforts, of course, is a way of controlling it or ameliorating it or at least softening the debilitating effects of aging. But for some scientists, I do believe, actually for many scientists, also at the heart of studying aging is what drives every scientist, is an insatiable curiosity and the hope of gaining new insights into how biological systems work that previously we didn't have. That's really what drives many of us in the laboratory, although it makes us feel good to think that maybe something we do will cure cancer or cure aging. At the heart of what drives most of us is this curiosity and this hope of uncovering new insights into biology. This is the age of biology, and it's an amazing challenge, and it's sort of the driving force behind many of us when we get into the lab. My own research is to try to understand how individual cells age. We think, we don't know for sure, but we believe that one of the components of aging is is the sum of individual cells aging within the organism. We discovered a way to identify old cells in tissue. We treat them with a dye, and the old cells turn blue and the young cells don't. So we could look at skin from young people and old people and simply ask whether we accumulate blue cells. And we do. What happens as a person ages is they accumulate more old cells. And so the tissue becomes clogged with cells that are not functioning properly. When the cell becomes old, it becomes, in a way, a different type of cell. It's no longer doing its proper job in life. It also becomes resistant to dying. That's probably part of the problem, is that they don't die. The problem with aging is the accumulation of cells that are now no longer producing the right molecules, but are producing molecules that can act outside of the cell and can cause the tissue to disintegrate. The cells become old as a consequence of dividing. They have a clock, the so-called biological clock, which determines how many times they can divide. And at the end of that magic number of divisions, they just can't divide anymore. So what is this clock? We really don't know for sure, but there is a leading hypothesis based on what we know about the genetic material that is the soul of every single cell. The genetic material is organized into huge, long strings of DNA. Every end of these long chunks of DNA are structures called a telomere.
The telomere has a little sequence of bases that's building blocks of DNA, repeated over and over thousands of times at the ends of all the chromosomes. So this was a very simple piece of DNA. It kind of reminds me of that tune that was in a movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which would drive you crazy if you heard it over and over again. It went something like this: da 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 da. So in order for a cell to divide to make two cells, each cell has to get a complete copy of all the DNA. Now, one reason that a telomere is important is that the copying process is not quite perfect. The enzyme machinery has a little problem. It can't quite copy the very, very end. Each time that cell divides and makes two copies of its genetic material, then each of those chromosomes will be a little shorter. And then it divides again, and each chromosome is a little shorter again. And so on and so forth, until the telomere has shrunk down into just a few repeats. And after a while, the cells stop dividing. So is this a kind of a clock where you run the telomeres down and then, die of old age? Some ideas are very appealing because of their very simplicity. But I think this is a kind of clock where a little kid can run up and set the hands back to zero very easily. Cells have a special enzyme called telomerase. So when telomerase is around, it can add a little extra DNA to the end of the chromosome and make it a little longer. So just a few years ago, there was a lot of interest in the idea that telomere shortening might be the cause of aging. And now we find that here's telomerase, like this naughty kid, coming along and turning back the hands of the clock again and adding more telomeric DNA. And it can do that in very mature cells in our body. I think science advances in a kind of a way where what happens is sort of like a watershed. You fill up this watershed with lots of information, then you get to a point where it can take you so far, and then it has to overflow into a whole new, completely different era of information. So I think we're filling up with information about genes and molecules that talk to other molecules that talk to other molecules. We're getting a lot of what I think of as linear information, right? Cause and effect in kind of linear pathways. I think the next big questions in biology will be, how do you integrate all this together? And the organism integrates it together, but we haven't really begun to sort out how to analyze that complexity very well. We're great at picking out individual components of that pathway. So we can follow little short strands. If you think of it, a great big ball of yarn made up of all these strands that were stuck together, and we can follow individual little strands, but we're not really good at seeing how all the strands integrate information from all the other strands. And maybe we need big computational tools, maybe we need other algorithms, mindsets to do it. So I think we're in an age of biology which will evolve into another kind of exciting age. We've got lots of building blocks, and now we have to start, building the castles, right? And trying to figure out how the castles are built.
There's a popular myth that redwood trees are 3,000 or 4,000 years old, and bristlecone pines perhaps even older. The fact of the matter is that those trees are not as old as we have been taught to believe they are. Those trees are no older than 30 or 40 years. The bark, of course, is dead, and the next layers that you penetrate are the living cambium layers. But as you penetrate further into the trunk, that tissue is dead. The oldest living cells in a redwood tree or a bristlecone pine are found in the needles, and they're no older than about 30 years. So that all viewers who are older than 30 years are older than the oldest redwood tree. The tree has learned how to hold on to its dead cells for architectural purposes. You and I have not learned how to do that, and consequently don't end up being as big as a redwood tree. We have going on in our bodies what's called cell turnover. We have cells dividing, some classes dividing every day, others dividing every week, and others dividing every month or two. With the exception of your neurons and your muscle cells, the cells that were present in your body 10 or 15 or 20 years ago are no longer there. So that you are literally not the same person you were 10 years ago. As a matter of fact, when you celebrate your birthday, you should only be celebrating the birthday of your neurons and muscle cells, which have been around since birth. Everything else is new. The question of what is an individual is very difficult to determine. In the case of replication of plants, for example, through root systems, where a single tree or bush gives rise to more trees or bushes, all attached to the original parent from an original single bush that sends out roots underground, the creosote bush forms a ring. Ultimately, the bush in the center dies, and you end up with a very wide ring.
King clone, at the time it was dated, was the oldest living plant complex known at the time. It was dated at 11,700 years old. The plants that make up that ring, they aren't 11,000 years old. But that ring itself, to me, that's where the significance lies, that it was able to persist so long and maintain that form, and the integrity of that ring is still there.
We all understand that our lives are finite. But there is an aspect of our bodies that is indeed immortal, and that is either our sperm or egg cells that go on to provide a new generation. So that you and I and our viewers represent the leading edge of an immortal lineage of cells that have been in existence for many millions or tens of millions of years.
Je pense que le vieillissement, ça n'existe pas. Je crois que c'est une façon de dire autre chose, le vieillissement. C'est-à-dire que je crois qu'on est prisonnier d'une idée comme quoi il y aurait un âge d'or de l'organisme, quelque chose qui serait formidable, je sais pas, vers 16 ans, quoi, un truc comme ça, probablement. Un peu plus tôt chez les filles, peut-être. Et qu'à partir de là, tout serait une lente dégradation à partir d'un état parfait. Oui, ce qui est frappant, c'est qu'on dit souvent un homme est âgé. Comme si avant d'être âgé, il n'était pas âgé aussi. C'est-à-dire comme s'il n'avait pas d'âge avant. C'est pour ça que je n'aime pas ce terme de biologie du vieillissement. Moi, je préférerais la biologie du temps. Quand on est un biologiste, on travaille sur la structure. On prend une cellule, on l'ouvre, on la casse, on regarde les molécules, les interactions entre les molécules, la cellule. Donc en fait, et quand on fait ça, c'est nécessaire, c'est indispensable, mais on fait une opération qui elle-même est nécessaire, c'est qu'on arrête le temps. Toute opération de type travail sur une structure arrête la chose la plus formidable du vivant, c'est-à-dire la durée. Et c'est la durée non pas uniquement la durée physique, c'est-à-dire le temps qui s'écoule, c'est la durée en tant que modification de l'organisme la division, par exemple, la division cellulaire, c'est du temps. C'est du temps parce que les cellules ne se dédivisent pas. Il n'y a pas de marche arrière dans la division cellulaire. Et quand on construit un organisme, l'organisme, ça bourgeonne. Hein, c'est-à-dire qu'au départ, on a un petit bourgeon là, c'est comme une plante, hein, et puis ça pousse. Hein. Au fur et à mesure que ça pousse, ça va faire le bras, l'avant-bras, puis ce qu'on appelle l'autopode, hein, la main. Mais les cellules se divisent et celles qui sont divisées en dernier, ben, elles vont faire la main. Et celles qui sont divisées en premier, elles vont faire le bras. Donc ça veut dire qu'en fonction du nombre de divisions, elles savent, entre guillemets, à la construction de quel organe elles doivent participer. Donc ça, c'est un exemple précis en biologie de comment le temps et la forme ont partie liée. Je pense que le temps, c'est de la déformation. Dans les individus vivants, je crois que le temps, c'est essentiellement de la déformation. Le temps, c'est pas une entité extérieure à ce en quoi il se grave, et le temps se grave dans la déformation. Le vieillissement, c'est de l'histoire. C'est une individuation. Chaque individu est unique. Justement à cause de l'histoire. cause de la durée. Si tu prends un individu qui n'a jamais joué du violon, par exemple, d'accord, et que tu lui demandes, tu lui apprends le violon. Bon, alors chez un adulte c'est un peu long, mais néanmoins, si tu regardes les représentations dans le cortex sensoriel de la main, c'est-à-dire le nombre, la densité des réseaux neuronaux qui sont impliqués dans la sensation de la main, parce que c'est là où ça monte. Hein. Si quand je me pince, ça me fait mal, c'est parce que là j'ai une représentation de la main, j'en ai même des dizaines et des centaines de représentations de la main dans le cortex. Eh bien, quand on regarde la densité des réseaux neuronaux mains, c'est-à-dire que les mains du cerveau, si tu veux, eh bien, ça augmente très très vite. En PET scan, avec la caméra à positon, on peut regarder. Au bout d'un mois, tu as déjà la main qui a grandi dans le cerveau de façon considérable, même si tu ne vois rien ici. Parce que la sensibilité a augmenté, parce que le travail a modifié la représentation de la main dans le cortex. Et ça, c'est de l'individuation, bien entendu, c'est de l'histoire. Si je n'avais pas appris le violon, eh ben, ma main serait restée ce qu'elle était, une main de bûcheron. Donc nous sommes des organismes qui nous construisons dans un rapport au monde, dans le rapport aux autres, dans le rapport à l'environnement. Donc, et cette construction ne s'arrête qu'à la mort, justement parce que notre cerveau se modifie en fonction de notre histoire. Donc en fait, je ne sais pas ce qu'est un individu. Nous sommes des objets en cours d'individuation. Voilà. Et il n'y a pas de raison de donner une valeur positive ou négative à ce qui se passe après 16, 20, 25, 30, 40. Ça n'a pas de sens. Ça n'a pas de sens. C'est refuser qu'il existe des individus de dire ça. Moi, je suis pour tous les artefacts. Hein. S'il y a toutes les pilules, tous les machins, moi je suis prêt à les manger, il n'y a aucun problème. Je crois qu'en même la meilleure pilule, c'est encore de vivre. C'est-à-dire de rester dans cette incertitude de ce que va être l'instant suivant.
On s'aperçoit que la durée qui nous est impartie actuellement, biologiquement, c'est juste suffisant pour commencer à construire quelque chose et ensuite c'est fini. Donc c'est vraiment, ça ne va pas du tout. Il faut qu'on vive plus longtemps. Il faut, avec les possibilités actuelles, je ne sais pas, minimum 200 ans, oui.
You could imagine a scenario in which people said, well, we must never live longer. We shouldn't do that. That would be immoral, unethical. So we should stop this research. No, that could happen. But I think that would be a shame, because I think that from this understanding of old age, we are going to, we know so little now, we'll know so much in the future. We'll really be able to pick and choose which aspects of that we want to incorporate into new drugs for people. And it's really, I mean, I just know that things coming out of it will be useful to us. It would be, you would have to be so pessimistic not to believe that you would be irrational. People would laugh at you. And it seems very likely that we could get the good parts out of it without necessarily getting things that we might think would be detrimental to society. But what we need first is knowledge. We have to know how it works before we can pick and choose.
For the first time, we have enough fundamental information about biological processes that there is a hope, real hope, of changing what we are and how we respond to our environment and what our genes tell us we must do.